So section 1, multiplying and dividing rational expressions. So what does rational expressions basically mean? Not a radical expression, a rational expression. What's rational? Fractions. Rational would be alluding to fractions. So that's what you're going to be doing. Basically, it's multiplying and dividing fractions. So just to do a basic math problem here, 2/3 times 3/4. That's what you're going to be doing today, except, of course, it's algebra. There's going to be a bunch of letters in there. So how would we multiply these two fractions together? No, that's adding. See, that's more difficult. We'll get to that. Top times the top. So you would have what? What? 6 over, which would simplify to 1/2. So that's what you're doing today. You're going to multiply letters and numbers together. You're going to get this fraction here. Then you simplify the fraction, cancel out anything you can, just like we did right there, to end up with your final answer. So if you had the exact same fractions here, only it was divided by 3/4. If you don't divide fractions, what do? Multiply the reciprocal. That is the rule. So on your homework, whenever you see a fraction divided by another fraction, I wouldn't even write that part down. That's just more time it's going to take you. If you realize that this is a divide problem, so if you see this problem in your textbook, I wouldn't even write that. I would go ahead and just write down the first fraction, change it to times, and flip the second one. So you would have 4/3. So in your homework, it's going to be 2 different types of problems, or maybe 2 types of examples we do, but it's really, you're doing the exact same problem. So just remember that as we go through. So you'd have 8/9 for that. Okay? So today, some of the problems will be obviously easier than others. As you go along, they'll get more difficult. But you might have something like 2 times x minus 3 over maybe something like that. I don't know. So what you're looking for, what the goal is to get things on the top and the bottom that are the same that you would be able to cancel or cross off. What could we cancel or cross off here? The x minus 3's, and that's exactly what you do. You cross those off, and you're left with 2/x. That's simplified. Nothing else you can do to that, so you leave it and move on. Obviously, in your homework, though, it's not going to be that simple. You're not going to be given exactly what you need to cross off. You'll have to get that on your own, then cross it off. One other thing that will happen that I want to cover before we start, you have the exact same numbers in there, only it's 3 minus x. So what's the problem there? It's not in the correct order. So there is a step that you do that will automatically get that in the right order. It's called taking a negative out of that, which is going to change both of those signs. So you're going to end up with a positive x and a negative 3, which is exactly what you need to do. So anytime that this happens, where there's a minus in between them, if there's a plus, order doesn't matter. You have x plus 3 and 3 plus x, go ahead and cross those off. But with minus, it's not the same. So what you're automatically going to do here is leave the top exactly the same. You're going to make whatever is out front of this negative and flip that around to the way that you need it to be. Taking out that negative changes the signs under here. It's just a step. You don't need to necessarily understand why it works as much as you need to understand that's a step that you do in the process. So we cross those off. So this time we're left with -2 over x. And that will happen a lot in your homework to illustrate the point. It will be in the wrong order and you'll have to flip it around. So that's kind of an introduction to what we're doing and a couple of things you'll need to know ahead of time. And now we'll get started on some examples. If you look over at page 444, we will start off with monomials. Those are the easier ones, and it's actually review. We've done problems like it before. 4a over 5b times 15b squared over 16a to the third. Now the other day I had several people wanting to do one method and several people wanting to do another method here for this problem. I'll show you both, and of course you'll be able to choose whichever method you want to do. So if we do the same thing that we did on these fractions up here, the first examples that we did, multiply the top and the bottom and then simplify, we can apply the same logic right here. So 4 times 15 would give you what? 60. And a, b squared, you just write those letters together. You're multiplying them, you'd have a, b squared. You just multiplied the top there. And 5 times 16 on the bottom would be 80. And your variables, a cubed b is what you'd have there. And just like back in chapter 7, I think, keep your variables lined up so when you cross them off or when you cancel them, it's easier for you. So we've multiplied, now we just simplify. So 60 over 80 would simplify to be what? 3/4. And then you divide the variables just like we did in chapter 7. I think it's chapter 7. So where's your smaller exponent with the a? In the top, so we cross that off and we subtract 1 on the bottom. So on the bottom we would have a squared. Where's your smaller b? In the bottom, so we would take that to the top, subtract 1, and we would have just b to the first power. So the other way, which I think is easier, and most students do as well, but maybe not all, is to cancel before. Cancel those out before you multiply them, and your answer will most of the time be simplified. So can you cross anything off? 4 over 5 is 4/5 already simplified. It's 4/5 in the simplest form. Yeah, so you can't do anything to that. You can't cross off the a or the b. Same over here with this fraction. You can't 15 over 16. You can't simplify, and the letters can't either. But you can simplify the 4a, the 16a, the 5b, and the 15b squared. And that's totally fine to do before you multiply if that's the method you choose to use. So we have a 4 and a 16. What's the biggest thing we can take out of there? A 4. So this 4 will be gone, and 16 divided by 4 is 4. So you'd have a 4 left, and I usually just write those down below or up above. Now we have the a and the a cubed, so what can you take out of there? An a. So again, this a is going to cancel, and you're going to drop this down 1, so you have a squared. And you do the same with the other two. What can you take out of 5 and 15? 1. So your 5 cancels, and your 15 becomes 3. Cancel out the b, and you'd still have a b on top. So you end up with 3b over 4 a squared. Either way, you get that. Are there any pluses or minuses of adding and subtraction problems anywhere in that example? Not a one. And you have to determine that in the beginning, because what the biggest problem with this section is you end up tying the polynomial or the monomials and the polynomials together. And there are different rules for each one. You've got to recognize that going in. And we'll get to more of that, but you got to recognize when you go into this, there's no addition or subtraction anywhere in there. So we'll do another one of those. Look at example 4 on page 444. Example 4B there. What type of a problem is that? What's the sign in between? Division. So what do we automatically do? Change the sign to what? Multiply, and then we flip the second. So you're going to write the first one exactly. 4x squared y over 15a cubed b cubed. And we're going to change it to times, and we're going to flip the second fraction. Where are you going to do that at? Just leave it with G. So we're changing it to multiply, and we flip the second one. So it's 5ab cubed over 2xy squared. And I'm not going to show both methods for all these. I'll show both methods in the beginning. I'm going to use the one we cancel in the beginning. You can use whichever. So we can't, again, cancel anything here. None of the letters are the same, and 4/15 is simplified. So we cancel crossways. It's not cross multiplying. Some people were saying that the other day. It's not what you're doing. You're just canceling anything where you have like terms. So the 4 and the 2 will be left with 4. A 2. Crossing off, you can take an X out. So where do we have an X left? On the top, the X in the bottom cancels. And with the Y, we take a Y out, nothing left there. We have a Y left in the bottom. Question?
Will we cancel if we can get to simplify on the bottom
Like if you could simplify here?
and like miss it?
Probably not wrong, though. If you had a 16 here and you decided to cancel over here, you wouldn't necessarily be wrong, but your final answer probably wouldn't be completely separate. Always check that, what you get over here, and make sure there's not something else you could take out, because sometimes there will be. There might be on this problem. So we take out the 5 from the 15 and the 5, so we'd be left with 3 again, nothing on top. So where would we have an A then? On the bottom, what would we have? A squared. And on where would we have a B? Nowhere. They completely cancel out. So what's left on the top? 2x. And on the bottom? 3a squared y. So no, there's nothing on this one. Nothing you can cancel there, but always check. If you had a 2 and a 6, you would have to simplify that in the final step. So again, those are all monomials. This is one term, one term, one term, one term, the tops and the bottoms. We're going to go ahead and start on the polynomials now, which are the more difficult ones. But just remember, rules are separate. So if you see pluses and minuses, you got to know what those are. So page 445, example 5 there. We have x squared plus 2x minus 8. All over x squared plus 4x plus 3. Times 3x plus 3. All over x minus 2. So I told you back in chapter 5 that you would eventually have to do all of those factoring rules again. And this right here is where you have to be able to factor all those tops and bottoms of all the fractions in the homework. Some of you will have no problem. Some of you struggled with this when we had it in chapter 5. So it's going to be right here again. The good news is you can use Quad 3, the calculator program, to simplify these anyway. You have to remember what's always the first rule of factor. Look for what? which is also known as common term. You have to do that. No matter what, you have to do that. You have to look for, or be able to look for a common term. For instance, this part right here, you cannot do that in your calculator. Quad 3 will not simplify that for you. So you have to be able to do that part on your own. Difference of squares, your calculator will do, but you still have to remember to take out a common term. So your calculator will be a very valuable tool, especially for you guys that did struggle with factoring. Because there are some of you that could get the factors to this, that bottom one right there, faster than factoring quad 3. That's totally fine. I highly encourage you to continue to use factoring instead of just relying on your calculator, because there will be times you'll have to know how to factor. So just throw that out there for you. It's a good practice to keep using as you go along. So looking at the top, we're going to factor each one of these completely separately. So basically, you've got 4 separate problems to do before you start off. So looking at just this top, is there a common term that you can take out of all 3 of those? No, they don't all have an X, and there's no number that each one of them has. So you've done step 1. Remember, difference of squares. So this is review. Look like this, where you have a perfect square and a perfect square with a minus in between them. So this has 3 terms. It's definitely not. And hopefully by now you recognize that that is a trinomial. So I'll show you again how to use quad 3 for those of you that don't remember on your calculator. And by the way, Red Day, there was a couple calculators that people had deleted the quad 3. I am not going to continue to go back and fix these calculators where people are continuing to just type stuff in, delete stuff, change stuff, add programs. So it'll get to the point where I won't do that anymore. So I don't understand why anybody would do that anyway. Everybody here relies on them to get their homework done, so it makes no sense to me. But we did have a couple that were screwed up, and I had to take a class time to come around and fix them. Use the calculators for what they're meant to be used for. If you don't know how to use them or don't want to use them, then leave it in there, okay? Because that's a huge pain for me to go back and add those programs and people will delete it. So to get to quad 3, hit your program button right there in the middle of your calculator next to X. And it says quad 3, you should have it in the list there. Push enter to run it. Push enter again, and it says, what do you know? What do you know? So looking at number 1, that's exactly what you've got there. You got your 3 terms. That's what you know. You push enter, and you have to plug in A, B, and C. So what's A? 1, B is 2, and C is -8. Make sure you put -8 in there. You push enter, you get your factors. What are they? X minus 2 and X plus 4. Remember, you're getting factors, not zeros. So you're not going to put 2 and -4 up there. You're going to put the factors. X minus 2 and X plus 4. And then you do the same thing with the bottom one. So if you push enter, it gives you options. You need to do another quad, so you push enter there on 1. Again, what do you know? It's the same thing. So A is 1. B is 4, and C is 3. What are your factors there? X plus 1 and X plus 3. So we get done with that side. Now we look at the top of the next one, and that is not a trinomial. Is there a common term there? What? 3. You can take a 3. This one has a 3 and that one has a 3. So if we take the 3 out, that means you're dividing the 3 out. 3x divided by 3 would leave you with what? We're taking a 3 out of this term right here. What would be left? X plus 3 divided by 3 is 1. That's what we have there. Over. So that's not, you're looking at X minus 2. That already looks like a factor. Looks just like these other things. So that is factored. There's nothing you can do to X minus 2. There's not a common term. It's not difference of squares. It's not a trinomial. There's nothing you can do. So you just leave that as X minus 2. So back in the introduction, that's why I was showing you that problem. that's where we're at now. We have gotten everything factored. We got to go back and just cancel anything that there is in common. What's something we can cross off? We can cross off the x minus 2. Okay, that's gone. What else? The x plus 1. That's gone.
Do we like, last time we had like, when we divided it, we just have to have like 3.
No, do not do that. That's where we were solving. You were going to divide the 3 by 0. No, here it's all very important. So what's left on the top? What? What else? The 3. So what you write is 3 x plus 4. That's what's left on the top. What's left on the bottom? X plus 3. And this right here is why it's so important to remember the rules. Some of you might look at this and say, well, I've got a 3 and a 3 here. Why can't I cross those off? Because we did on the other problems. You cannot cross those off when it's being added. When something's being added or subtracted, like the 3 is here. This 3 is not. That's not being added to anything. That's being what do we call that operation? Distributing or multiplication. So this one's being multiplied. This one's being added. You cannot cross those two things off. You can when everything's being multiplied, like it was in the first example. We didn't have any adding and subtracting. So anytime you have something like x plus 3, the only way you can cross that off is if you have an x plus 3 on the top. Just like we had here. We could cross these off. They were exactly the same. I'll show you more examples of that as we go along. So just keep that in mind. You can't cross off if it's being added or subtracted.